Imagine waking up one morning to find that the map of Canada has changed forever. One of its provinces, Alberta, has decided to break away and become its own independent country. What would that mean for Canada? What would it mean for Alberta itself? And how would the rest of the world react to this brand new nation rising in the middle of North America? This is not just a random thought. Over the years, the idea of Alberta separating from Canada has surfaced again and again, fueled by debates over money, resources, and politics. But what if it actually happened? Stay with us as we explore this fascinating what-if scenario that could change the balance of power in North America. And before we dive deep, don't forget to like this video, comment with your thoughts, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps us going and helps us bring you more curious stories from around the world. Alberta is a province with a strong sense of identity. Known for its vast prairies, the Rocky Mountains, its booming energy industry, and its cowboy culture, Alberta often sees itself as different from the rest of Canada. Many Albertans feel they carry more than their fair share of the country's economy, especially through oil and gas revenue. At the same time, some feel that the federal government in Ottawa does not always treat Alberta fairly or listen to its concerns. These tensions have led to talk of independence movements, sometimes serious, sometimes symbolic. But let's imagine for a moment that Alberta actually held a referendum, voted yes, and declared independence. The first question is, what would Alberta look like as a country? On paper, Alberta has a lot going for it. It's about the size of France and bigger than many independent countries. It has around 4.7 million people, which is more than some well-established nations like Ireland, New Zealand, or even Norway. It has vast resources, especially oil, natural gas, and agriculture. Economically, Alberta could stand on its own. In fact, with its energy wealth, Alberta might rank among the richer countries per person if managed carefully. Its new currency, if it created one, could be backed by oil revenues, much like how some countries build wealth on natural resources. But it wouldn't all be easy. Becoming a country isn't as simple as drawing a new line on the map. Alberta would need a government separate from Canada, with its own constitution, military, central bank, and foreign policy. That's a massive undertaking. Alberta would have to decide, keep the Canadian dollar or create its own currency. Join international organizations like the United Nations and World Trade Organization, or remain independent. Negotiate trade deals with the United States, its southern neighbor, or lean more toward global markets like Europe and Asia. These are huge questions, and each decision would shape Alberta's future. Let's talk about borders. If Alberta left Canada, the most pressing issue would be landlocked geography. Unlike British Columbia, Alberta has no direct access to the ocean. This creates a huge problem for trade. Right now, Alberta exports oil, beef, wheat, and other products through Canadian ports in Vancouver, Prince Rupert, and the East Coast. As an independent country, Alberta would need agreements with Canada or the US to continue using these ports. Without such deals, Alberta could struggle to get its products to international markets. Imagine a new Alberta caught in constant negotiations with Canada just to move its goods. That could make independence more complicated than it looks at first. Then comes the question of money. Alberta's energy wealth has always been both a blessing and a challenge. On one hand, the province produces more oil than anywhere else in Canada, making it an energy powerhouse. On the other hand, oil prices go up and down, creating economic booms and busts. As an independent nation, Alberta's economy would rise or fall largely with the price of oil. This could make it vulnerable, especially in a world that is slowly moving toward cleaner energy. To succeed long-term, Alberta would need to diversify its economy, investing in technology, renewable energy, or other industries that go beyond oil. Otherwise, independence could leave it too dependent on a single resource. But what about identity? This is one of the most interesting questions. Alberta has a culture that is both Canadian and unique. The Calgary Stampede, cowboy hats, ranching traditions, and strong rural communities all give Alberta a character that is different from, say, Toronto or Montreal. If Alberta became independent, it would likely embrace this identity fully. It might position itself as a Western democracy with a rugged, self-reliant spirit. similar to countries like Australia or Texas if it were a nation. It could market itself as the energy capital of North America, or even as a modern frontier state. But at the same time, Albertans would have to decide, are they leaving behind the Canadian identity altogether, or keeping close cultural ties to the rest of the country? Now, let's flip the question. What would independence mean for Canada without Alberta? First, Canada would lose one of its most resource-rich provinces. Alberta's oil sands and natural gas production are vital to Canada's energy sector. Without Alberta, Canada's economy would shrink significantly, and the federal government would lose billions in revenue. This could weaken Canada's position on the world stage. Politically, Canada would also feel the shock. Losing Alberta could trigger debates in other provinces. If Alberta can leave, why not Quebec, which has its own history of independence movements? Could Canada even hold together after losing such a big piece of itself? And what about the United States? Alberta shares a long border with Montana, North Dakota, and other US states. The US is already Alberta's biggest customer for oil and gas. If Alberta became independent, it might quickly deepen its ties with the US, perhaps even relying on Washington for defense and trade. Some even imagine Alberta becoming so close to the US that it might one day join as a state, though that would come with its own challenges. Still, the US would likely welcome Alberta's independence if it meant greater access to Canadian oil, without having to deal with Ottawa. But let's not forget the challenges of independence. Separating from a country is rarely smooth. Think about Brexit, when the United Kingdom left the European Union. Years of negotiations, economic uncertainty, and political division followed. Alberta would likely face similar chaos. How would pensions, healthcare, and public services be managed? Would Albertans still have access to Canadian citizenship and passports? What happens to Canadians living in Alberta and Albertans living in other provinces? These issues could create years of tension and uncertainty. And then there's defense. As part of Canada, Alberta is protected by the Canadian Armed Forces and by NATO through Canada's membership. As an independent country, Alberta would have to build its own military from scratch or make defense agreements with the US, but building an army, air force, and border security is expensive. For a country with under 5 million people, it might be a heavy burden. Would Alberta want to invest heavily in defense or rely on larger neighbors to keep it safe? Still, the dream of independence has an appeal. For some Albertans, the idea of keeping more of their tax money, making their own laws, and controlling their own resources is powerful. They imagine a future where Alberta is free from what they see as interference from Ottawa. Independence could allow Alberta to craft policies suited to its own unique culture and economy, rather than being tied to the rest of Canada. But reality is always more complicated than dreams. Alberta might find independence empowering in some ways, but limiting in others. Its success would depend on smart leadership, strong international partnerships, and a clear vision for the future. Without those, independence could create more problems than it solves. So, what if Alberta left Canada and became independent? It would gain freedom, pride, and control over its destiny. But it would also face challenges with trade, defense, and stability. Canada would lose a key part of its economy and identity. The US might gain a new close partner. And the rest of the world would watch closely as a brand new country tried to find its place. In the end, Alberta's independence is not just a question about maps or politics. It's about identity, belonging, and the balance between freedom and cooperation. Whether it ever happens or not, it's a fascinating thought experiment that shows just how interconnected our world really is. If you enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts. Do you think Alberta could survive on its own? Share it with friends and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into global what-if scenarios. Your support means everything and keeps us bringing these stories to life.